In this depth of field photo recipe, we'll be creating a composite image from 3 source images. So as you can see here in Lightroom, our 3 source images are from a series of images captured during a fireworks display at a lakeshore setting. And these images were captured in preparation for blending by mounting the camera on the tripod in order to maintain a consistent position between some foreground elements here, primarily this lighthouse structure, these lights, and the people spectating the fireworks display. So as a result, when we bring these photos into Photoshop to use some layers techniques to blend them together, we'll create the illusion of one stable foreground scene, and the 3 sets of fireworks will be blended together quite realistically as if they were all captured in one continuous shot. So before we take the photos to Photoshop to blend them together, we'll just use Lightroom here to clean them up just a little bit. So starting with our first image and pressing the D key on your keyboard to move into the Develop module. And one of the first things we're going to do to ensure that they're in their best condition is using the lens correction tool here. We'll want to enable profile corrections. And as you can see by the change in the image's appearance, that did correct a slight barrel distortion and also a bit of vignetting that's typical of this Canon EFS 1755 f2.8 lens. So that's the first thing we want to do, is ensure that lens problems, limitations are corrected. Next, we'll just go into the basic set of tools, and first thing we'll do is give Lightroom a chance to analyze the scene and set the white balance automatically. And here you can see it's done a bit better job than the camera did originally, restoring the more neutral tone of the lighthouse white paint to a less yellowed tone. So it's cooled the white balance a bit down to 2800 here. And then also in the basic tool panel, the image looks nice, but I think it could be a bit more colorful and crisper. So let's increase the clarity to 30, the vibrance by 20, and the saturation by about 10. And I think you'll agree that's given the red color in the fireworks a bit more impact. So that having been done, one more small adjustment we'll make in the tone curve tools here. Just to give the image a bit more pop, we'll increase the dark value on the tone curve by 10 and decrease the shadow values by -10. And this just gives us a bit of a more dramatic contrast in the scene. Sometimes also in the basic settings I might increase the blacks, but with this kind of night scene with a very black sky, I don't think we'll need to do that. So we'll just leave it at the 5 that has been assigned during the import process. So now, having cleaned up this image, and with all 3 of our images shot in close together in time and with the same settings in the camera, I think we can confidently apply the develop settings that we've improved the first image with to all 3 of our images. So staying in the develop module and just going to the settings menu, we'll choose the sync settings item, having selected all 3 images in the film strip. And here we'll make sure that the little settings that we changed in white balance, basic, the tone curve, and the lens corrections are used in all 3 of the images. Also our color settings and clarity. So those areas will cover the various areas that we changed the settings for in the first image, and we'll synchronize all 3. And you can now see in the thumbnails that the plus and minus little icon in the corner of the thumbnail, and as we roll over, the tooltip shows that the photo has developed adjustments. So we've now used that quick method of synchronizing the settings to quickly apply the same settings changes we did on the first image to each of the other 2 images. So all 3 of these images now are similar and can be brought into Photoshop to be blended together. So to do that, we'll just switch back to our library mode, and again select our 3 images by holding down the Shift key and clicking on the first image and then the last image. Right click, and we're going to choose to edit these photos in Adobe Photoshop CS5 in this case, and we'll choose the Open as Layers in Photoshop item because we want to use the layers technique to blend these three fireworks together. So here we are in Photoshop, and our three images have been imported, and we're going to take advantage of some of the adjustments that are possible in Photoshop by using adjustment layers. So we'll go up here to the adjustments tool pane and choose the exposure adjustment. Click on that to add an exposure adjustment layer here down in our layers. And the other thing we want to do is we've got our purple image down here at the bottom, as you can see if I turn off the visibility of the other two layers. Green next, and finally the red layer. And to blend them together, what we want to do is reduce the opacity of each of those two layers. So choosing the layer with the green fireworks and just bringing that down to about 45% opacity, and then the red layer and also reducing that to about 45% opacity. So there you can see now that all three of the fireworks are displayed, and meanwhile our foreground elements are still looking quite realistic, even though the three layers have been blended together as a result of having been tripod mounted and the position of these elements in the foreground remaining consistent in all three shots. So you might say, well, aren't we done? Why do we need this exposure adjustment layer? Well, as you can see, the exposure of the fireworks is pretty dim as a result of having had the opacity reduced in each of those layers. So what we're going to do with our exposure adjustment layer is bring the exposure of the fireworks areas of the three images back up. And so the first thing we want to do is using the adjustment layer's built-in mask, we'll fill that, and by clicking the X key we can reverse our color swatches, and now we're going to fill, making sure that the layer mask is selected here. You can see it is by the bounding box around it, and moving into the image and fill it with black. Then press your B key to switch to the brush tool, press your X key to reverse the swatches, and we'll now be using our brush with white to paint onto the adjustment layer so that the areas that are in white will be the areas that will be affected, and what's in black, everything else that we started with, won't be affected by our exposure change, our adjustments. So here we go, we'll just paint onto the layer, and we'll just carefully paint over just the areas where the fireworks are displayed. And we can resize the brush using the square bracket keys. Left square bracket to reduce the brush size, right square bracket to increase it, just so we can save time and at the same time make some precise adjustments. Now you can see that no changes are happening yet, and that's because we haven't made any adjustments in the adjustment layer tool controls to the exposure. So we're going to use this slider here to change that exposure, and you can see as I slide it to the right and increase the exposure of just the fireworks is increasing, not the rest of the elements in the scene, those foreground elements. And as you know, brightly lit elements advance toward the viewer and dark elements recede away. So to focus attention on the fireworks, we want to keep their exposure up fairly high. You can also use the scrubby slider, and if you hover the mouse over the word exposure in the tool control here, you can drag that left and right to also adjust your exposure. I think that increasing the exposure to about 2 stops more than was originally the case there, after having reduced the opacity, looks pretty realistic, and I think you'll agree it's a somewhat more interesting photo now that the three elements have been blended together, creating a more interesting display of fireworks than we had in either of the original 3 shots. So we can now go ahead and save the changes to our final blended image, and going back over here to Lightroom and switching to the individual image display by pressing the E key, Shift Tab to remove the menus, and the L key just to dim the lights. And here you can see a pretty good rendition of our final image. We can now export that as a JPEG or export it to Facebook or Flickr to share the photo and enjoy that nicely blended composite image.